Alright, so to get started, we're going to do a little basic project in Grasshopper just so you can see how the overall screen works. We're just going to be, for this first part, we're just going to do everything within Grasshopper. And Grasshopper runs within Rhino, so if you can open up just a blank version of Rhino, this is essentially what we're going to be making. Just a very simple like step ladder that has two lines and then a couple steps that are within that connect the other two lines. So to get started, again, just type in Grasshopper and you should see your Grasshopper canvas within Rhino. Just to get started, we're going to insert a point in Grasshopper, which is then going to make a point in Rhino. So if I come over and do click on vector, click on point and construct point, and just click on the canvas, and I can see that I've already made a single point in Rhino and within Grasshopper. And by default, it is set at 0, 0, 0. So if I look at the X, Y, and Z, they're all set at 0. So if I want to adjust where this point is located, if I go back to parameters, I click on number slider, and I put one of these on the screen, and by default it's at 0.25, and I click the output and I drag it into the X of the point. I can now adjust that one single parameter. If I input another one, drag that into Y, I can now adjust that single point just by having two different variables. I'm going to leave them both at 0 for now. And what I want to do is I want to create a second point somewhere up here. So instead of redoing all this over again, I'm just going to select all three parts of that definition. On my keyboard, I'm just going to hit Control C for copy and Control V for paste. So just copy and paste using your keyboard. And the Y I'm going to adjust. So now I have this set at my first point's at 0, 0, my second point's at 0, 1. And connecting these 2 points, I'm just going to make a simple line. So I come over here to curve, primitive, and line. And if I look at this new component, again, it's just a line, create a line between 2 points. And if I look at the input, all it's asking is for a starting point and an ending point. So I give it a starting point and an ending point. And now I've created a line over here. The nice thing within using Grasshopper, by default I have this one point that's the maximum is set to 1. But if I right click and go down to values, it's set between 0 and 1, but I can click on the maximum 1, and it's just like a dial. If I click on it and move it up or down, it adjusts. I can move it up to, say for example, 10, commit changes, and now I'm able to adjust the slider between 0 and 10. The next thing that I want to do is, instead of creating a new line, I'm just going to copy the line that I already have. There is no real form of copying within Grasshopper. I'll go into this part later. Moving is essentially a form of copying. So if I go into move, let's see, transform, Euclidean, and then move. Here, if I look at this new move component, what it's asking for is the overall geometry that I want to move and the direction that I want to move it in. So the geometry that I want to move is this line. So I plug this in. And because I'm in top view, I'm not really noticing a whole lot that's changing. But if I look in my the motion, the vector that it's moving in, I can see at the bottom it says one locally defined value 0, 0, 10. So if I know the way the grid is set up, it is technically moving, but it's moving up. But since I'm in top view, I can't really see it that much. But when I switch over to my perspective view, I can see that that line is now moved up 10 units. But essentially what I want is I want to move it along the x-axis. So I'm going to come back over here to vector. I know I have to go to vector because when I hover over the T, it says translation vector. So there's a little hint as to where do I need to go. So I go to vector. I'm going to pick unit X. I'm going to plug that in. And I can see that it's already moved 1 unit. So instead of before at the it used to read 0, 0, 10. Now it reads 1, 0, 0. So by default, by putting in this x vector, it's moved it 1 unit in the x direction. But I also want to control how far over it can go. So I'm going to come back to this slider, the one that I made to go between 0 and 10. Select the slider, and on my keyboard hit Control-C, Control-V. Just copy-paste. And now if I plug that in, I can see that it's moving it dependent on the number that's within this slider. So now what I need to do is I need to divide this first line, divide the line by a series of points. So I come up here to curve, division, divide curve, plug this into C because C is the curve that I want to divide and a line is a curve. And by default, it's dividing it by a number of 10, which is fine. Again, I'm going to copy and paste that component. Plug that in. And I want to use a slider to adjust this number. One thing I can do is I've already copied and pasted this slider. I can just copy it and paste it again. And I just want to use one slider to adjust both of these, the numbers for this division. I also know that it needs a number. I can see that little black hexagon shape. It's giving me a 7. And it's just a little hint as to it needs a number. The one thing that you'll notice is this slider set up with decimals, and as you move it, say for example in this case I'm at 4.097, and as I start to move it up to 386, 444, it's doing absolutely nothing. Not until it gets to 4.5, and then it rounds up. And then it adds a different point. And the reason why it's doing this is if you look at the hover over the N for count, it's looking for whole numbers. It's not looking for decimal numbers. As opposed to some of these other inputs. This one is also looking for a number, but it has a 0.1, so you know that's a little hint as to it's looking for a decimal number. The same thing with these. It has a 0.1 in that black hexagon, so it knows it's looking for a decimal number. But this one is looking for a whole number. So if we want, we can leave the slider as is and it'll still work. Or we can right-click, go to slider type, and change it to integers. And by changing it to integers, it changes the slider to only work in whole numbers. And then what I want to do is I want to add the lines that connect these individual points. So again, I'm going to go back to curve, primitive, line, and then it's looking for my starting point. I'm going to use the division of points. There's a series of points that are in this component, a series of points that are in here, and as soon as I do this, it's connecting those individual points. So now I have a few things that I can start to adjust. This is adjusting the overall height. And the last thing that I want to do is, right now I'm just looking at these with as single lines. I want to make these into a surface or give them a pipe. So if I come over here to surface, freeform, pipe, what I want to do is I can just immediately plug this in to, if I look at pipe, what it's asking for is the individual curves and the radius. So I can plug this in, and it's giving all of them a radius of 1. Again, I can just, at this point I'm just going to make a new slider. Parameters, slider. I can plug that in. For now, what I want to do is these division points. I want them to work, but I don't want to see them. So I'm going to right-click and click on Preview, and the same thing to the other one. And I notice that it goes like a darker shade or gray, so that means the preview is on, or the preview is off. I unpreview those, and I'm going to unpreview my original 2 points. So the only thing that I'm missing now is the original curves, the original curve that I started off with, and the one that I copied. So I'm going to move this pipe component. Just going to move it back over here. And if I notice, if I go to my original line, right, here's the 2 points that I started off with to make this line. If I plug this line into C, it disconnects the first one and it only keeps the most recent one. And the same thing here. If I highlight the move, it highlights this line. And if I plug in that geometry into C, again, it disconnects my previous line and it only has this line. So in order to get this to work properly, I have to hold down the Shift key as I'm adding multiple components. So as long as I hold down the Shift key, now I can add both. I'm going to move the pipe back. And again, hold down the Shift key and add that last line. So now I have all of them that are piped. I can adjust the overall radius, the count of the amount of steps that it has, how it's being moved or copied over, and the height. And again, because this is running in Grasshopper, I can always adjust any one of these sliders So for example, I don't want to have a maximum of only 10. I could always go back and right click, go to values. I can change this to 15, for example. And now I can make this a little bit larger. The one thing you will notice is because this entire definition is only running in Grasshopper, I cannot select anything in Rhino. Because it's only running in Grasshopper, it only lives in Grasshopper, it exists in Grasshopper. Until you do something that's called bake. And once you bake something, it actually gets that actual geometry in Grasshopper and as something that you can use. But for a quick introduction into Grasshopper and what it looks like, this is the overall definition that we just made. But as a quick introduction, this is the way Grasshopper runs and it works. And hopefully you'll be able to set up this definition.